struggling with focus and exposure, here's the fix forever. Hey everyone, it's Johannes here, and I've been a bit off the grid lately. You might have seen this in my community post, but I was sick and I have also wrapped up a super demanding job for Volt. But now I'm back with a strong video that I think can really help you nail your shots, especially in street photography, but honestly this technique applies to all kinds of genres. In today's video I want to show you a simple way to take full control over your focus and your exposure. So whether you're shooting street, video or portraits, this will work. And I call this a hybrid BBF setup, a back button focus setup, but I've tweaked this in a way to keep the shutter button active too, which gives me both speed and control. And I will show you exactly how I set this up and how you can adapt it to fit your style too. And I use this method on both my Sony cameras and on my Fujifilm X-M5. They work a bit differently, but you can still achieve this setup and the same benefits even on other brands than Sony and Fuji. And of course, make sure to stick to the end because I have a little bonus option on how you can make this even more advanced and take even more control of your scenes. So what is back button focus and back button auto exposure? Well, normally when you press the shutter button halfway, the camera focuses, and when you press it fully, it will take the shot. This works fine in many situations, but it also means the camera decides where to focus and expose based on its metering. And of course you can control the metering and also how it focuses. But to keep it simple, especially when I'm out shooting, I really like to use the automatic systems of the camera to help me get the focus and also the exposure. And that's why I 90% of the time rely on the camera to do continuous autofocus and to use a multimeter exposure where the camera will take a reading of the whole scene and try to set the exposure after this. But this is not always ideal, especially with fast-moving subjects or in high contrast situations. And this is especially true with the Fuji's subject and face detection systems, because while it is really great for tracking, it also exposes for the detected subject. So if your subject is in shadow or it is backlit, then the camera might blow out the background completely. And this is where manual control through back button focus and back button auto exposure becomes really crucial. And yes, it is not just exposure, autofocus can trip you up too, even on the more reliable Sony cameras. And for example, on my Sony camera, if I'm shooting through a fence or some sort of foreground object, then the camera might focus on that instead of what I want. Or if I am waiting for someone to walk into a certain area of the frame, then the camera has nothing to lock onto yet. And when the person finally walks into the frame, the camera might not recognize that this was the subject that I wanted to have focus on. And with back button focus, I can pre-focus exactly where I want and be ready for the moment when something enters the scene. Because back button focus separates the focus from the shutter, so you decide what stays sharp. Now I want to be clear, my setup isn't strict BBF. I still use traditional shutter button focus in many cases, but I also have a custom button assigned to switch into manual focus, which effectively locks the focus without needing to hold any button. On my Fuji X-M5 and Sony a7 III, I do often use the touchscreen to tap and set focus when shooting street. I just find this really convenient that you can tap the screen where you want the camera to focus and it will focus on that area. On my Sony a6000 though, which doesn't have a touchscreen, I use the center button for quick center focus, and if I want to keep it without holding the button, I can switch to manual so the focus doesn't change. This function does not exist on the Fuji X-M5 and I really wish it did, because I also use this from time to time on the a7 III. And this is also really handy when you are doing video shots. It's not classic BBF, but it works the same in real world scenarios, and it is faster and more natural in some cases, I think. Back button auto exposure is kind of the same. Instead, it locks the exposure where you want it, not where the camera thinks it should be. And again, I have set up a dedicated button to have an exposure lock. So again, this is not the textbook setup for a back button auto exposure, but the result is the same. Total control while still being able to use the automatic functions when they are suitable. So just a quick side note here into the video. I just want to share with you that Wanderer right now is having some sales. I think it's a 10-year anniversary sale or Memorial Day anniversary or whatever they call it. But basically this just means that they're having sales on many of their great bags in their store, and they are definitely worth to go out and check. I use Wandered for my street photography and also when I am packing my things for professional work. And I really think that they have some nice and nice looking bags that are durable and really comfortable to use. So yeah, I use them personally, and I just wanted to share that you can get a really big discount at the moment. So if you're looking for a new bag to use with your cameras or your gear, then go and check out Wandered, because you might find something that you really enjoy. So I will quickly run through how I set this up on my Sony and my Fuji cameras. And you can use the little time codes down in the timeline to scroll to the camera that you're using if you want to see how I did it for this camera brand. On the Fuji camera, I've set the AFL to lock focus. And then the record button for video will lock the exposure. For the Fuji camera, you have to go down to the wrench, and then you have to go to button dial setup. And in here you will find function settings. So here you can set the recording button, as I have done, to AE lock only, and this will lock the exposure. And for the AEFL button, you can set this up to be AF lock only, so this will lock the focus. And this is how I have set the Fuji camera up. On Sony, the AEL usually locks focus, but on some models like the A7 III, I set the C1 for exposure, while on the A6000 I use the C2 button. And this is just the way I did it, but you can adjust the buttons to fit your shooting style. In fact, I might even change the AEL on my A6000 to C1, so it matches my A7 III. And that way it will also align with my Fuji setup, where the record button on top is at the same spot as the C1 button on the Sony cameras. So for the Sony camera, I apologize, my menus are in Danish, but I think it should be easy to follow along. And here we need to be in the second tab, and then you need to go to page 9. And here you will find the special buttons. And yeah, they are both set up for video and photo. And you can see here what I have set is custom button 1. And this is set to auto exposure lock on and off, and not the hold one, because then you need to hold the button to make it work. And as I said, also set up the middle button on the multi-dial, so it will do standard focus. This just means it will focus in the center of the screen, just as I have shown on the A6000. And for the function of the AEL button, this is set to autofocus manual focus control. So if I press it, it will go to manual focus, and if I press it again, it will go back to autofocus. And the A6000, again, apologize for the Danish menus, but I think it should be easy to follow along. And on the A6000, you also need to go into the menu on the second tab, but here we have page 6 where you can change the buttons, and they are called special dial buttons. And the first one is the function of the AEL button, and again it is set to shift autofocus manual focus control. So when you press it, it will switch to manual focus, and if you press it again, it will switch to autofocus. And then my C2 button is set to AEL on and off, and not hold, because if it is set to hold, then you need to hold it in to make it work. And also, as I mentioned, the middle of the wheel here is set to focus down the center, and this is actually just the standard function of the camera. And again, just to sum up, I don't use full back button focus because I still like keeping the normal focus function on the shutter button. This way I have the best of both worlds. I can quickly use the shutter button as usual, but when I need to lock focus, I have this extra control. So yeah, in street photography, I don't rely on autofocus speed all the time. Instead, I pre-focus on a spot and I wait for my subject to stop in, so I never miss the moment. For silhouettes and high contrast scenes, the Fuji AI focus locks faces, but that can ruin my exposure. So by locking exposure manually, I ensure the right balance and avoid blown out highlights. For video, the focus trick can also work because it will stop your camera from hunting all the time, so you or the subject stay sharp every time. If you're shooting indoors or in a scene where there are a lot of natural light that shifts quickly, so when you're shooting in changing natural light, for instance, it can do that rather quickly, and sometimes you need to decide if you want to expose for the background or for the foreground. And by locking the exposure, you have the choice to make this and you can decide what you feel is important, and you can make sure it stays consistent when you are shooting. And so here is where it gets even better, because as I've said many times, and as you can see in the video here up on the screen, I like to shoot in aperture mode, especially when I'm out doing street photography. And this is really great because you can fine-tune the exposure here with the exposure compensation dial, making quick adjustments without having to switch to manual. So this means that if you're using the buttons that I've set up here to lock the exposure, you can still use the exposure dial to tune in how you want it to be if it's not exactly how you want it. Plus, this is also an indirect way to control the shutter speeds, at least if you set the ISO to a constant like 100, because if you're using the exposure dial here, the only thing the camera can use to change the exposure of the scene is the shutter speed. So this gives you a way to control the shutter speed even though you are in aperture mode, and this is really handy, I think. So do you think this was useful, or do you use another way of shooting that you want to share here with the community? Please make sure to drop it in the comments, because we can all learn from each other. So I guess there's nothing more left to say than take care, guys, and I will see you around. Boy.
I'm the biggest in the game, I'm the one they talk about. Everybody know my name, my resume is loud.